stood at the podium with a microphone in her hand, and she looked straight at me when she said it. "I used to be embarrassed to bring friends home," my daughter announced to the entire banquet hall. "My dad drove a pickup truck with a cracked windshield. We shopped at Goodwill. I spent years trying to distance myself from where I came from." There were maybe 200 people in that room. Her colleagues, her new husband's family, people in suits that cost more than my monthly pension check, and every single one of them turned to look at the table in the back corner where I was sitting alone, in the sport coat I'd bought for my wife's funeral 4 years ago. She laughed after she said it, like it was a charming little anecdote, like the man sitting in that back corner wasn't her father. I didn't cry. I want to make that clear. I'm 63 years old and I have buried a wife, outlasted 2 layoffs and raised 2 kids mostly by myself after my wife's MS got bad. I don't cry easy. But I felt something leave me that night, something I didn't get back for a long time. Her name is Melissa. She was always the sharp one. Straight A's, debate team, full scholarship to Penn State. I drove her there myself in that cracked windshield truck, helped her carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and drove home alone with the radio off the whole way back to Harrisburg. I was so proud I could barely breathe. Her husband's name is Thaddeus. Thad. His father runs a private equity firm in Philadelphia. They met at a conference, got engaged after 8 months, and had a wedding at a vineyard in Chester County that I was not consulted about in any way. I paid for my own hotel room. I was seated at a table with people I didn't know. I'm not telling you this to complain. I accepted a long time ago that my daughter had built a life that looked nothing like the one she came from. I understood it, even, when you grow up watching your mother struggle to walk to the bathroom. When the heat gets shut off in February because the bill didn't get paid, you want out. You build walls between yourself and all of that. I understood. But understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. The dinner that night was for Than's promotion. He'd made partner at the firm. It was a formal event at a hotel in Center City, Philadelphia, and Melissa had called me 2 weeks before to invite me. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," she said. Something in her voice made me think she meant the opposite. So I came. I pressed the sport coat. I shined my shoes. I drove 2 hours in the truck and paid $22 to park in a garage. And then she stood at that podium and told 200 people she'd spent years trying to distance herself from where she came from. From me. I sat there for about 10 minutes after she finished speaking. Long enough to watch people clap. Long enough to watch her laugh with Thad's mother near the dessert table, her hand resting perfectly on the woman's arm, comfortable, belonging. Long enough to understand that I was a prop at this event, not a guest. Then I folded my napkin, put it on the table, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to her. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. I nodded at the coat check girl, got my jacket, and walked out into the November cold to find my truck. I sat in the parking garage for a while before I started the engine. I wasn't sure I should drive, not because I'd been drinking. I'd had 1 glass of wine that I'd nursed for 2 hours because I was watching my budget, but because my hands were shaking in a way that didn't have anything to do with the cold. I thought about calling my son Owen. He lives in Portland, works in construction management, is the quiet one. He wouldn't have said what she said. But I didn't want to worry him, so I didn't call. I just sat there until my hands stopped shaking, and then I drove home. The drive back to Harrisburg takes about 90 minutes on a good night. I spent most of it replaying her voice, the lightness of it, the way she'd laughed. Like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. Or at least like I was just the punchline to a story about how far she'd come. I had given everything I had to give that girl. After my wife's diagnosis, I worked double shifts at the warehouse for 3 years straight. I learned how to cook because she couldn't stand at the stove anymore. I learned how to braid Melissa's hair because her mother's hands had gotten unsteady. I helped with homework at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night when I'd been on my feet since 6 in the morning. I never once told those kids we were struggling, even when I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to make sure they had full plates at dinner, and I'd driven that cracked windshield truck to Penn State, with her boxes in the bed, and I had been so proud I could barely breathe. I didn't sleep much when I got home that night. I fed the dog, I sat in the kitchen, and I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator. Melissa at her high school graduation, her mother in a wheelchair next to her, me standing behind them both with my hand on my wife's shoulder. We were all laughing at something. I don't remember what. I thought, I don't know who she is anymore. And then I thought, maybe I never did. The letter came 11 days later. I almost missed it. I get mostly junk mail and medical bills, and I'd gotten into the habit of sorting through the pile over my coffee in the mornings and throwing most of it straight in the recycling. But this envelope was different. It had a law firm's return address in the upper left corner and my full name written out in the kind of clean, formal font that means someone paid attention. I sat down before I opened it. The letter was from an attorney in Columbus, Ohio, a man named Hartwell, representing the estate of my uncle, Franklin Aldous Crenshaw, Uncle Frank. I hadn't seen Frank in almost 15 years. He was my father's older brother, a bachelor, his whole life intensely private. He'd worked in industrial supply for decades, lived alone in a house outside Columbus, drove the same car for 20 years. He was never warm exactly, but he'd sent cards on birthdays, called on Christmas. When my wife passed, he'd sent flowers and a handwritten note. That was more than some people did. He had died 6 weeks earlier. I hadn't known. The letter informed me that, under the terms of his will, as his only surviving nephew, I was the primary beneficiary of his estate. I had to read the next paragraph 3 times. The estate was valued at approximately $1.4 million. There was a house, a small investment portfolio he'd quietly built over 40 years, and a life insurance policy. I put the letter down on the kitchen table. I picked it up again. $1.4 million. My uncle had lived like he had nothing. He drove a 20-year-old car. He never took vacations. He wore the same canvas jacket every time I saw him. And for 40 years, quietly, without telling anyone, he had been building something. He left it to me. I sat in that kitchen for a long time. The dog came and put his chin on my knee, and I just rested my hand on his head and stared at the wall. The first thing I felt was not joy. I want to be honest about that. The first thing I felt was grief. For Frank, who I hadn't called enough, hadn't visited, hadn't known was sick, then I felt something that took me longer to name. I thought about Melissa at that podium. I thought about her voice when she said she'd spent years trying to distance herself from where she came from. I thought about our last name, Crenshaw. She'd kept it when she married Thad. I'd been a little surprised, actually, because she'd spent so long trying to be something other than what we were. But she'd kept it. Melissa Crenshaw Whitfield, hyphenated on the wedding program. Crenshaw. The name she was embarrassed by, the name she'd laughed about in front of 200 people, the name that had just inherited $1.4 million. I called Attorney Hartwell the next morning. He was straightforward and kind, walked me through the process, explained the timeline. It would take a few months to settle the estate. In the meantime, he recommended I not make any major decisions, just let the legal process move forward. Of course, I said, I appreciate that. After we hung up, I made a list. Not of things to buy. That's not the first place my mind went. I made a list of things I'd been putting off for years because I couldn't afford them. The roof, the truck, a new water heater, a physical exam I'd been skipping because of the deductible. Small things. The kind of things that accumulate quietly when you spend 20 years making just enough. I did not call Melissa. I thought about it. I picked up the phone twice, but each time I heard her voice at that podium, the lightness, the laugh, and I put the phone back down. I called Owen instead, told him about Frank, He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." "Does Melissa know?" "Not yet." Another pause. Owen is careful with his words. He always has been. He said, "Take your time with it." I said I would. She called me 3 weeks later. Not about the inheritance. She didn't know about that yet. She called because she needed something. Thad's firm was hosting a client retreat in late January. A big event, important clients. Spouses were expected to attend. There was a dinner the first night at a private club in the city, and apparently the reservation required a minimum head count, and somehow they were short, one person, and Melissa thought, she actually said this, she thought it might be good optics for me to come. Good optics. I was 63 years old with a cracked windshield and a dog and a paid-off mortgage on a house in Harrisburg, and my daughter wanted me to be good optics at a dinner for her husband's clients. I said I had a prior commitment. She was quiet for a moment. "What commitment?" "I have some legal matters I'm attending to," I said. "Family estate business." "Whose estate?" "Uncle Frank's." She paused. "Uncle Frank died 6 weeks ago." I could hear her processing that. "Then I didn't know." "No," I said, "you wouldn't." There was a long silence on the line, and then carefully she said, "Was there? Did he have anything?" There it was. Not, "I'm sorry I didn't know." Not, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." Not, "Are you okay, Dad?" "Was there anything?" I said, "I'm still working through it with the attorneys. It may take some time." "Of course," she said. "Of course. Well, let me know if you need anything." I said I would. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen again. The dog was asleep under the table, the refrigerator was humming, the photograph was still on the door. Melissa, my wife in her wheelchair, me with my hand on her shoulder, all of us laughing. I thought, this is the moment. This is the part where I decide. I am not a man who holds grudges easily. I want to say that. My wife used to tease me about it, said I was too quick to let things go, that I needed to stand up for myself more. She wasn't wrong. I spent most of my adult life absorbing things. The layoffs, the medical bills, the years of watching her decline, the loneliness after. I absorbed all of it and kept moving forward because that's what you do when people depend on you. But there is a difference between forgiveness and foolishness. My daughter had stood at a podium in front of 200 people and publicly announced her embarrassment about her father. She had laughed. And then when she called 3 weeks later, her first instinct was to ask if there was anything in the estate. Not, "How are you doing?" Not, "I owe you an apology." Was there anything? I talked to my attorney, my own attorney, a woman in Harrisburg I'd known for years, sharp and no nonsense. I told her about the inheritance. I told her about Melissa. I told her what I was thinking. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "It's your money, Walter." I corrected her. "My name isn't Walter. That's the name I won't use." "She knows my name," she said it properly. "I'm just telling you how that conversation felt. Like the first time in a long time someone had looked at me and said, 'Clearly, this is yours. You decide.' I updated my estate documents. I established a trust. The majority of what I inherited from Frank would be managed carefully. Invested. Grown. Protected. I paid off the roof. I replaced the water heater. I bought a truck with a windshield that doesn't have a crack in it. I scheduled the physical. I set aside a portion for Owen, not because I love him more, but because he never once made me feel like a prop. For Melissa, I set aside enough to cover 1 year of her student loans, the ones she'd mentioned once, years ago, the ones from grad school that Thad's family hadn't paid off. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't a windfall either. The rest I put into a foundation. Small, simple, my wife's name on it. Scholarships for kids from Harrisburg who were the first in their family to go to college. Kids who maybe grew up watching their parents struggle. Kids who know what it's like to want out. I didn't tell Melissa about any of this right away. She found out the way these things usually come out. A mutual family friend mentioned the estate at Thanksgiving, mentioned that it was significant, mentioned that I'd been working with attorneys. Melissa called me the Sunday after. Her voice was different this time, careful in a way it hadn't been before. "Dad," she said, "I need to talk to you about something." "I know," I said. She went quiet. "Then I think I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. I let her go. "What I said at Thad's dinner," she started. Stopped. "I wasn't thinking about you. It was a speech, and I was nervous, and I was trying to connect with people in the room, and I said something that I shouldn't have said, that I didn't mean the way it sounded. I listened. I'm sorry," she said. "I'm genuinely sorry. You're my father, and I love you, and I was thoughtless." There was real feeling in her voice. I want to be fair about that. I've known my daughter for 34 years, and I can tell when she's performing and when she isn't. This wasn't a performance. "I hear you," I said. "I want to come see you," she said. "I want to sit down, just us. Can I do that?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "Yes, you can." She drove out the following Saturday. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd opened Frank's letter, where I'd made my list, where I'd looked at that photograph on the refrigerator and asked myself who she was. She looked at the photograph too, sat there for a long moment, looking at her mother in the wheelchair, at me with my hand on her shoulder. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I forgot how happy she looked." "She was always happier than the situation deserved," I said. That was her gift. Melissa wiped her eyes. She didn't try to hide it, which surprised me a little. She said, "I think I've been running from something for a long time, and I think I convinced myself that running was the same as succeeding." I said, "Those aren't the same thing." "I know," she said. "I know that now." We talked for a long time that afternoon. About her mother. About what it was like growing up. About things she'd felt that she'd never told me and things I'd felt that I'd never told her. It was the most honest conversation I could remember having with her in years. I told her about the foundation, about her mother's name on it. She cried again, really cried, not politely. And then I told her about what I'd set aside for her. She looked at me for a moment. "That's all?" I said. "Yes." She nodded slowly. I watched her face as she processed it. The quick calculation, the adjustment, the thing that flashed across her eyes and then disappeared. And then she said, "That's fair." I think she meant it. I think she understood. I've had some time now to sit with all of this. The inheritance, the conversation, the foundation, the new truck sitting in the driveway. I'm not going to tell you everything is fine between Melissa and me, because it isn't. Not entirely. Repair takes longer than a Saturday afternoon, but it started. Something started. I think about Frank a lot, a quiet man who never made a fuss, who drove the same car for 20 years and never took vacations and sent flowers when my wife died and wrote a careful handwritten note, who spent 40 years building something that he knew he was going to hand to someone else someday. He never told me. I never knew. I wish I'd visited more. I think about my wife too. About the way she laughed in that photograph. About the way she used to say I was too quick to let things go. I think she'd have mixed feelings about all of this. She'd have wanted me to forgive Melissa, and I think I'm getting there. But she also would have understood why it couldn't just be handed over without any reckoning. She was a fair woman. She believed in consequences. I named the foundation after her. The kids who get the scholarships will carry a piece of her name into their futures. Kids from streets like the ones I grew up on. Kids who might one day be embarrassed by where they came from, who might run from it, who might stand at a podium somewhere and laugh about the cracked windshields and the goodwill coats. I hope they don't. I hope they understand what those things were actually made of. But if they don't, if they need time to figure it out, well, I waited 34 years for my daughter. I can wait for them too. I keep coming back to one small detail, not the letter from the attorney, not the number on the page. I keep coming back to the way Frank lived, the same car for 20 years, the canvas jacket, the cards he sent on birthdays without fail. He never announced what he was building, he just built it, quietly, consistently, without needing anyone to see. That's the part that stays with me. I spent a long time after that November dinner asking myself where I'd gone wrong with Melissa, what I'd missed, whether I'd been too soft, too available, too willing to absorb whatever she handed me without pushing back. But sitting with it long enough, I think the question itself was wrong. I hadn't failed her by loving her too much. The problem was that I'd never taught her, not clearly enough, not early enough, that love and accountability live in the same house. That you don't get to accept everything a person gives you and then stand at a podium and laugh about the giving. That's a failure of character, not hers alone, mine too for not naming it sooner. What I've come to understand is that the way a person handles what they've been given, whether that's money or a name or a father who showed up, tells you almost everything about who they are on the inside. Melissa is smart, she always has been, but intelligence without integrity is just a sharper tool for getting what you want. It took her standing in that banquet hall, laughing into a microphone, for me to see that clearly, and it took her sitting at my kitchen table really crying for me to believe she might be starting to understand it too. I've thought about Frank a lot through all of this. A man who never needed credit, who did the right thing year after year in total silence, who built something real and then handed it forward without ceremony or condition. That's the kind of strength I want to carry. Not the loud kind. The kind that doesn't require an audience. I'm 63 years old. I've outlasted things that should have broken me. 2 layoffs, my wife's illness, 17 years of watching her decline and showing up anyway every single day because that was the right thing to do and because she deserved it. I didn't do any of that because I expected a reward. I did it because it was mine to do. That's what I want the kids who get those scholarships to understand someday, the ones who carry my wife's name into their futures. That resilience isn't about never falling apart. It's about what you choose to do before anyone is watching, that your integrity is the thing you build in the quiet years when no one is taking notes, and that the name you carry, wherever it comes from, whatever it sounds like, whether it makes people laugh or not, means exactly as much as you're willing to put into it. Melissa is finding her way back. I'm letting her. Slowly, carefully. The way you'd tend something that got frost damaged. You don't tear it out, but you don't pretend it's fine either. You give it time and you watch what grows. That's all I'm doing now. Watching what grows.